Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome back to it. Welcome back to this really short flip that we're going to record. I'm even going to put on a timer so I can try to keep it like under 12 minutes. All right, so biggest thing that we did today in class is we started talking about the reign of Louis XIV, right? We actually got into it a little bit. We started talking about it a little bit. Now, the number one thing that we have to do up today is we got to finish up the reign of Louis XIV, and we got to try and keep it as swift and as quick as possible. Now, before we do anything else, we talked about the Palace of Versailles a lot in class, right? Talked about it's 700 rooms, it's 1,200 pieces of furniture, it's no bathrooms, it's gigantic space. We talked about the fact that he's called the Sun King, and he's got this giant gate out front and stuff like that. He also has this place called the Hall of Mirrors where he holds all of his parties. Now, the thing about it, though, is that there is also a quote that apparently Louis XIV said that goes along perfectly with everything we're about to learn today. So do me a favor. You're going to write 4 words down. 4 words down, and it's 4 words that make up a quote that define Louis's absolute authority, okay? And here goes the story. Apparently, according to the story, the Sun King himself was being addressed by a noble, right? And the noble was talking to him saying like, well, sir, what about the blah? What about the blah? Or he was down at the Parlement, so he was one of the two. And they were like, sir, what about the food for the people? What about the famines and the diseases? What about this and that? What about the state, sir? And then Louis just snapped his face at him and goes, I am the state! And he just screams, I am the state, back in his face, right? So I am the state. It's a very, very, very good quote by Louis XIV that he may or may not have ever even said, but so he probably didn't say, but still, it's a really good story. And then on top of everything else, it defines his absolute authority, right? So because he's saying, I am the state. I am France. France is me, right? So and you can see that looking at his house, right? So now looking at everything else, though, you have to understand his power is massive. And a lot of it has to come down to the fact that he rules from his house, right? So he rules from his house, he rules from Versailles, okay? So he has centralized the French government completely around his home. And his power exudes from Versailles. That 12 miles outside of France, or outside of Paris thing is key as well. So he is 12 miles outside of Paris to avoid any kind of noble insurrection, because they did try to kill him at one point when he was a kid during the Fronde rebellions. Now, also, you have to understand it was what he called his palace and his ruling center. It was known as his royal court, right? Now, a court is something that we talked about all the way back in the Renaissance era, right? Remember we talked about the courtier that Balthasar Castiglione had written, and in the courtier, he was talking about a guidebook to life about how you should act during a court party and how you should be smart enough to advise a king, right? So court or holding court is basically having a giant party. When you walk into a court, you've got music playing and people dancing and there's drinking and food and masquerades and stuff like that. There's a really, really big and very intense royal vibe, right? People are wearing long robes. There's violin music in the background. It's a beautiful thing, right? But a little bit debaucherous during this time as well, but it's a beautiful thing. So what he referred to his court, though, as is it wasn't just a party. It was also this huge council of princes and nobles that carried out all of his policies from his house. He literally forced a third, or most of the nobility in France to live with him for a third of the year so he could keep his eyes on him, right? He literally had this house that was so big so that with these 700 rooms, so all these nobles could swap in and out. And he could have basically glorified sleepovers at his house and so he could watch them, right? So now looking at it as well, in his royal court, he also suppressed the noble authority by making it an extreme high-ranking position to help him get dressed in the morning, to help him take his boots off. Every time people would literally, when he woke up and came down the stairs, this is what it looked like. There's Louis XIV standing right there. Here is his royal court lining the staircase. And when he would wake up in the mornings and go down the stairs, people would be like, oh, look, he's here, and people would clap for him just because he got woken up that morning, right? So, the royal court is how he did everything. And a big part about the royal court as well is its division, okay? He didn't create, he used this type of noble to suppress this type of noble, okay? Well, other way around. So, now, you have to understand, there are 2 types of nobles in France, okay? There are robe nobles and sword nobles, okay? Robe nobles are nobles that bought their way into becoming noble, right? So it would be Samira, who is very high ranking, very smart, very rich, very wealthy, but she's still a part of the middle class and she's not actually a noble yet. she would come up to me, the king, and she would buy her ability to become a noble, which makes it so she doesn't have to pay taxes as much anymore. She also has new noble privilege. She is actually eligible for more offices, like the Farmers General and tax collection, and she can now actually have more power, right? And I'm going to benefit because she has to pay me to get this, so it's going to be a way that I can infuse money into my personal bank account, right? So, like, that's a road noble. And people like Samira, the road noble, are going to basically do anything I tell them to because they want to keep their power and their privilege. Now, the sword nobles are people like Sophia Bucola, right? Sophia Bucola has earned her nobility through military service, right? And she's the only one in France allowed to carry a sword around with her. And she doesn't like me very much because she feels as though I'm taking a lot of her power away. And also she feels that since she served in the military, she shouldn't have to like suck up to me and stuff like that, right? So as you see, he creates and makes more road nobles and he has them living at his house, right? So all these people are road nobles that live with him at Versailles and carry out his policies. And this right here is a sword noble that's coming in to report on the affairs of war, right? Because the sword noble still led the military. Now, another big thing about Louis XIV, you have to understand, is that he's extremely Catholic, right? So he is going to revoke that thing that his grandfather wrote, right? His grandfather was Henry IV, right? Henry the Great, who wrote that document known as the Edict of Nantes, who made it so Protestants would not be persecuted in France anymore, right? That they like that Catholicism would be the official religion of France, but that basically Protestantism could not be persecuted anymore, right? So the thing about it is what does Louis do with that piece of paper? Like he just completely tears it up, right? Tears it up, revokes the Edict of Nantes, and starts destroying Huguenot churches, destroying their schools, forcing their conversion and stuff like that, and ends up running a very large number of them completely out of France. A bunch of them go to Prussia or the Netherlands, and they actually kind of help lead to this idea of like needing religious tolerance going into the Enlightenment, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind that a lot of Huguenots are going to flee under Louis XIV and go to other countries to escape his persecution and things like that. And also remember, why does he do these things? Because he can, right? So, like, because he's Louis XIV, and he has absolute authority, right? Now, another big thing about it is how he made his money. Now, so, he spent almost the entire French budget on palaces and funding his royal court. And another big thing about him is he adopted these policies from his financial advisor, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Like, he adopted these policies known as mercantilism to try and grow as much money as he could possibly get his hands on. Now, I'm going to explain mercantilism really, really quickly in a way that one of my AP students, Abigail Winningham, came up with, and it's a really, really good way to look at it, right? So imagine Louis XIV has a cookie jar, right? So, like, he's got a cookie jar, and according to him in his mind, this is how mercantilism works, okay? He's practicing mercantilism at this moment. So, in this cookie jar, he's got cookies. Now, Louis believes that there's only a certain number of cookies in the entire world, right? And he's like, if there's only a certain number of cookies, then I have to make sure that I have as many of those cookies in my cookie jar, and so the other leaders of Europe don't have any in theirs, right? Because I want the most. I want to have the most, right? And if I have the most, it means I'm the richest. And if I'm the richest, I'm the most powerful, right? So the big thing about it, though, is he also does not believe you should ever take a cookie out and buy anything or give it to anyone from a different country, because that cookie's going to end up in somebody else's jar, right? So that is the concept of mercantilism, okay? But instead of cookies, it's gold, right? So the way mercantilism works is that Louis basically believes, and he's not wrong, like, so that there's only a finite amount of gold and silver in the world, and that he needs to have as much of it in his bank account as possible to make sure that he has more than his neighbors do, right? And how do you accomplish this? You export more products than you import. Like, for example, a really good example to use is British tobacco, right? So British tobacco was very, very popular during this time period, and everybody wanted to buy it because it was the highest quality. It came from the Chesapeake Bay area, and it was coming from the original 13 colonies, and Louis was sick and tired of his people buying English tobacco with French money. Because if you're buying English tobacco with French money, that means that this money is now ending up in English people's hands, which is then going to be taken back to England and spent there, right? And he's like, where are you taking my gold at, bro? My cookies! And so he tries to end up actually having tobacco grown in Louisiana. Fails miserably because tobacco doesn't grow well here. But like to try and make it so like there isn't as much what he called smuggling going on, right? So now he also is going to increase tariffs as well to make it so like buying foreign goods is very, very expensive. So like a tariff is a tax on an import. But the big thing about it though also that you need to understand is he is going to die with a tremendous amount of debt because he's an absolute authority kind of guy. He's the kind of guy, he's not worried about the finances. He just knows that there's money there, so he's going to spend it, right? But he dies with a tremendous amount of debt, mostly due to the fact that he starts more wars than you could possibly imagine, right? So you have to understand that Louis was at war for 33 years out of his 54-year reign, right? For 33 years, not consecutive, but for 33 years out of his reign, he was at war. And one of the biggest ones actually happened all the way back when, do y'all remember this guy? Let me see if I can find him. So y'all remember this guy? One of his biggest wars was when Carlos II, right here, Carlos II, that guy from the Habsburg lands that couldn't walk until he was 4 or couldn't talk until he was 8. Come on, man. Get in there. There we go. No. What is going on? Okay, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. This is embarrassing, but I can do this. All right, so here we go. All right, so there's Carlos. All right, so Carlos II was the Habsburg guy that was sterile, couldn't walk until he was 4, couldn't talk until he was 8, right? So and he basically is going to die with no children and lead to the death of the Habsburg family in Spain. Well, guess who's going to take over after Carlos dies? It's Philip V. Philip V is going to, Philip V, Philip III, Philip V, Philip IV, Philip, okay, well, just Philip. Philip is going to take over. It's Louis's grandson, all right? So, Louis's grandson takes over the throne of Spain, so Louis starts trying to extend his power and basically gobble up a lot of Spanish territory and money, right? The rest of Europe came together, though, created a coalition, was like, Louis, and basically fought against him, right? And Louis is going to end up losing that war, but still, when you lose wars, you go into debt, and he lost 2 major wars on the back end of his reign, right? So, going into it, though, just so you understand, is that you have to get the fact that he is going to die with a huge amount of debt. When he dies with all that debt, he's going to leave it around for the following kings that come after him, right? And it's all just because he liked going to war, because he loved being known as the conqueror, is what he liked being called as well, right? But now what you need to understand is we're going to leave Louis XIV behind, who's going to die in 1715. It's going to be a majorly important year when we get there, okay? And we're now going to be moving over to Russia, right? So a couple things that you need to understand about Russia, all right? So, go ahead and write Russia, but then underneath Russia, write this down. During the Middle Ages, the Russians were controlled by the Mongolians, right? So Mongolians, under the rule of Genghis Khan and his son Kublai Khan, took over all of what you now know as Russia, right? So they controlled that completely during the Middle Ages, and it's going to take some time for the Russian people to break away. But they're finally going to start doing it during the late 1500s, right? So during the late 1500s, the Russians are going to still really cling to feudalism, but under the control and the leadership of a couple of grand princes of Moscow, they're going to start breaking away from the Mongolians and create this place called Muscovy, right? So they're clinging to feudalism desperately to try and stay alive, which means they have a huge population of nobles that exist in Russia, and nobles always take power away from central leaders until this guy comes along, and his name is Ivan IV, aka Ivan the Terrible, who is going to be the very first people to consolidate and unite all the nobles under one government, and he's going to centralize the Russian government underneath his leadership, and he is going to name himself Tsar, which is the code for a Russian king. And we are going to pick up right there when you get back to class. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.